September 1992. Heat rippled through the streets of Palm Springs as I clocked out from a draining night shift at the Center for Disabled Kids. I staggered out of the building, exhaustion carving deep lines into my face, my legs heavy as lead. Suddenly, there he is, waiting. Andrew Erdiales. A charming guy who'd given me a ride the night before when I missed the bus. His offer to drive me home again was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Grateful, I accept. Inside the car, it's different. The charm slips away as a knife is pressed to my throat. My heartbeat surges, slamming against my ribcage like a drumbeat of fear. His knuckles whiten as he tightens his grip on the wheel. I'm bound, helpless, my terror mirroring in the cruel glint of his eyes. The urban sprawl of Palm Springs gives way to the remote desert, its vast emptiness swallowing me whole. Once in the desert, he removes the knife, only to replace it with a gag. The cloth tastes like fear and old sweat, and it silences my screams. His hands are rough and merciless as they strike my face, my body. I can feel my consciousness slipping away, retreating from the torment. His blows came down like rain, sharp, brutal, leaving me gasping for breath. I had never felt such pain, such sheer terror. The coarse desert sand clung to my tear-streaked face as he forced me to the ground. Every scream, every plea, seemed to fuel his sadistic pleasure. He violated me repeatedly, it felt like an endless nightmare. In between the attacks, he left me to whimper in the sand, probably to relish the sight of his work. My body was a tableau of pain and despair, and I feared the worst was yet to come. Once he'd had his fill, Erdiales decided to be done with me. He forced me to stand and walk back to his car. Gasping for air, my legs carried me forward, propelled by a surge of adrenaline and an unyielding will to survive. The harsh desert wind whipped against my battered body, adding to the overwhelming sense of vulnerability that engulfed me. Each step was a painful reminder of the atrocities I had endured. He bundled me back into the trunk of his car. He had decided to dispose of me, to erase all evidence of his monstrous act, shutting me into the inky darkness. My world reduced to the cold metal shell around me, the bitter taste of fear mingling with the grit in my mouth. But in that darkness, my fingers stumbled upon hope, a release mechanism. I could escape, but I had to be smart. I had to wait for the right moment. As the car slowed down, I knew it was now or never. With every ounce of strength left in me, I pushed the trunk open and rolled out onto the road. And then, with a raw scream tearing from my throat, I ran. As I stumbled onto the road, the truck with the Marines screeched to a halt, their bewildered expressions reflecting the shock and concern that etched my face. They were like guardian angels, offering solace and a glimmer of hope. Their eyes met mine, filled with empathy and determination. I knew I was no longer alone in this fight. I collapsed, the reality of my escape setting in. My captor was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared into the shadows, like the vile creature he was. For 5 years, I relived the nightmare in my head. 5 years until Erdiales was finally captured. I had survived. That night started off as any other would. My boyfriend, Chris, and I were at a party, enjoying the usual camaraderie and cheer that came with our group of friends. The night was still young when we decided to head back home. We'd always loved the quiet late-night stroll to the train station. It was our time to reflect, laugh, and dream about our shared future. That night, though, our regular walk was about to turn into a horrifying episode that would mark me forever. As we walked, an unnatural silence crept over the area. It felt like the calm before a storm, a dread-filled stillness. Then, seemingly from nowhere, a man appeared. He was scruffy-looking, but it was his eyes that set off alarm bells in my head. They were cold, detached, devoid of any human warmth. He asked for money, but his presence made me feel like he wanted a lot more than just a few dollars. We didn't know it then, but we'd crossed paths with Angel Resendez, a man soon to be notorious as a symbol of terror. Before we could react, he was brandishing an ice pick, its pointed end shining ominously under the sparse, flickering lights of the deserted station. An icy fear gripped me as he herded us into a nearby ditch. This isolated, eerie spot was a stark contrast to the lively party we'd left behind. It was a place that felt lost to time, now destined to be the setting of a terrifying act. With a swift, chillingly practiced motion, Chris was forced to his knees. Resendez, his face a chilling mask of apathy, lifted a massive rock, its weight likely reaching 50 pounds. The events that followed are seared into my memory like a cruel scar. The rock came down on Chris's skull with a thud that echoed in the silent night. I watched in helpless horror as he continued this brutal action on Chris. The man who was my heart's companion was rendered lifeless within moments. But Resendez wasn't finished. He shifted his focus to me, his eyes burning with a perverse satisfaction. He subjected me to brutalities I'd never thought a human could inflict on another. He did unspeakable things to me, violating my body in a horrific manner. The ice pick, that once was just a threat, was now lodged into my neck. A wooden plank battered me without mercy. Each blow pushed me further towards the edge of consciousness until I slipped into darkness, certain that my end was near. Despite my expectations, I awoke later. The world was unnaturally quiet. Resendez had gone, assuming he'd left me dead. His grave mistake became my opportunity. Despite the debilitating pain and paralyzing fear, I dragged myself to a nearby house and collapsed. Waking up in a hospital, the full reality of my ordeal hit me. My body was a macabre testament to the horrors I'd endured. A shattered eye socket, a broken jaw, my neck pierced by an ice pick, and a myriad of other wounds. Each pain-filled moment, every reflection in the mirror, was a grim reminder of the horrors of that night. Out of the 15 unfortunate souls who crossed paths with the Railway Reaper, I was the only survivor. The only one who could bear witness to the monstrous deeds of this man. When Resendez was finally sentenced to death for his gruesome crimes, I felt an icy wave of grim satisfaction wash over me. The Railway Reaper's reign of terror was over. His legacy of horror was silenced not by the echoes of his victims' cries, but by the resolute voice of a survivor. A survivor who, despite bearing the cruel scars of that night, stood unwavering. It was a seemingly ordinary afternoon, September 6, 2006. I'd just hopped off the school bus, my mind still humming from the day's lessons, oblivious to the horror about to unfold. I remember him approaching, clad in a homemade police uniform. He flashed a badge, speaking of a bogus marijuana charge, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, the cold metal of handcuffs was encircling my wrists. His name was Filia, and he wore an unsettling pleasant smile. With a firm grip, he steered me into the woods, weaving a deceptive path. My sense of direction blurred with every step, the familiar surroundings warped into a disorienting maze. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as the mouth of a bunker emerged, a hideous underworld that was to be my prison. The inside was as dank and foul as you could imagine. It smelled of moist earth and something rotten. He ordered me to undress, a command followed by the unthinkable. The sexual assaults began. They were relentless, an unspeakable violation of my being. Filia fastened a chain around my neck, a harsh metal leash, threatening to harm my brother if I dared escape. I felt more fear than I ever thought possible. But through the sickening dread, an idea began to take form. I decided to play into his twisted game. I listened, I obeyed. Every time he called me baby, I echoed it back, each word tasting sour on my tongue. I love you, he'd tell me. I forced myself to parrot it back, pretending to reciprocate his warped affections. A bizarre bond, if you could call it that, began to take root between us. Captor and captive in this horrifying dance. Maybe he believed me, maybe he didn't. But it made him loosen the chain around my neck. He even let me step outside, gave me his phone to distract myself with games. Little did he know, he handed me my lifeline. One night, when his snores filled the bunker, I seized the chance. My trembling fingers typed out a text to my mom. Hi Mom, I'm in a hole across from Charm Hill where the big trucks go in and out. There's a bomb. Call police. The message flew into the ether, my desperate hope clinging onto its tail. Soon, the hum of helicopters was breaking the silence overhead. Local news was buzzing about my intercepted message, and the manhunt was closing in. Filio was rattled, an ugly mix of fury and fear. I told him to leave, warned him of his inevitable capture if he stayed. He fell for it, and he vanished into the night. Morning crept in on September 16th, 2006. That was the day freedom found me. As search officers combed the area, my voice finally broke free, shouting for help. One of them, Tom Lee, found me. He often says he didn't save me, that I saved myself. Maybe he's right. I survived Filio's terror. I was whisked to a hospital, away from the dank bunker. My family was there, a reunion I dreamt of during those endless nights. Filio was nabbed a day later, armed with a pellet gun, a knife, and night vision goggles, miles away from my prison. He said he used me as a pawn, hopes for forgiveness. I can't give him that, not after what he did. Today, I'm in my late 20s. I made it through college, became a dental assistant. I survived Filio's hell. And I want to tell you, you can survive too. Life's blows can be brutal, but faith, talking to someone, and believing that it's not the end of the world, that can make all the difference. A gunshot echoed through the night, shattering the silence of the Australian outback and forever changing the course of my life. In an instant, our peaceful road trip turned into a chilling nightmare, the sparks flying from our van's exhaust pipe replaced by the brutal spark of a firearm. Moments earlier, Peter, my boyfriend, and I were on the road trip of our lives, driving through the vast expanse of the Australian outback in our trusted van. The sky was a blanket of stars, the desolate roads promising adventure, and we were not aware of the horror that lurked just around the corner. The man who flagged us down, Bradley John Murdoch, looked like an ordinary guy. He had a concerned look on his face as he pointed out sparks flying from our exhaust pipe. Pete, being the kind-hearted person he always was, got out to investigate. A chill wind blew across the desert, sending a shiver down my spine. The silence that hung in the air was deafening. And then, a gunshot shattered the stillness. My heart plummeted as realization dawned. Murdoch had shot Pete. Before I could process the horror of what was unfolding, he turned his attention toward me. His eyes were wild, fueled by the frenzy of amphetamines, and they held an intention that made my blood run cold. It was clear. I was going to be his next victim. My heart pounded against my chest as the cold bite of cable ties closed around my wrists. The reality of his intentions sparked a primal fear inside me, but I knew I couldn't afford to succumb to it. I had to stay alert if I wanted to survive. Abruptly, Murdoch yanked me out of the van. I landed hard on the asphalt, a sharp blow to my head making my vision blur. Despite the disorientation, I saw my chance to escape when Murdoch turned his attention to moving Pete's body. Adrenaline overpowered the fear, and I seized the moment, bolting into the undergrowth. For over 5 hours, I lay hidden, my heart pounding with every passing second. Every crunch in the dirt, every whisper of the wind seemed like a harbinger of Murdoch's return. The silence of the outback was no longer peaceful but a terrifying reminder of my situation. Eventually, the threat felt distant, and I ventured out, flagging down a passing car. The nightmare was over, but the relief was replaced quickly by the anguish of losing Pete. I had survived, but the loss was overwhelming. Justice was served when Murdoch was convicted of the murder. However, the closure was incomplete. He never revealed Pete's location. That unanswered question, the uncertainty of Pete's resting place, left a wound that would never fully heal. That dreadful night changed everything. It was a cruel reminder of the unpredictability of life and the risks lurking beneath the surface of our everyday adventures. But it also underscored the power of the human spirit, of the will to survive. I bear the scar of that experience, not just as a painful memory, but as a testament to my survival, my resilience. Yes, I survived. I survived the horror and the loss. And as I carry this story forward, it serves as a tribute to Peter Falconio, the man who embarked on this journey with me, the man who will forever be remembered as a part of this harrowing tale of survival. I remember it so clearly, the nightmarish moment that seared into my memory, refusing to fade. I was just a high school senior, barely 18, still hanging on to the last remnants of my innocence. I was getting ready for bed when an unsettling voice wormed its way through my open window, coiling around my heart with its icy chill. My neighbor, a stocky man with an eerie stare, had positioned himself at the fence dividing our yards. His words were filthy and disturbing, so lewd that they'd make even the toughest guy cringe. It was clear he'd been watching me. A voyeurism that made my skin crawl. Scared out of my wits, I kept the incident a secret, hoping, praying, it was just some kind of grotesque anomaly. The following morning, a grim dawn of reality awaited me. As I was dolling myself up for school, a strange noise echoed through the house, the creak of our back door. My gut churned like a stormy sea, a premonition that it wasn't my mom, but that sick neighbor who had trespassed into our sanctuary. Gathering my courage, I descended into the kitchen, my heart pounding like a wild drum. And there he was. This twisted caricature of a man, brandishing an 8-inch knife that gleamed ominously under the morning light. The predatory look on his face was one I'd never forget, a mixture of lust and madness that sent shivers down my spine. He rasped at me not to move, his voice as sharp as the knife he held. But the look in his eyes, it was as if I was staring into the darkest abyss. I knew then that complying wasn't an option. As he lunged forward, his grubby hands reaching for me, I darted out of his way. His intent was clear. He wanted to rob me of my dignity, to strip me bare. The sight of his lecherous grin, the very thought of his touch, made my stomach churn in revulsion. But I wasn't about to let him get what he wanted. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I bolted. I dashed out of that house like a terrified deer, my heart thudding in my chest as if it were about to explode. I pounded on every door I came across, my screams shattering the early morning tranquility. The fear was so palpable, I could almost taste it, bitter and metallic on my tongue. The cops arrived just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, their sirens wailing a symphony of salvation. The cowardly monster had retreated back to his den, feigning innocence. But his mask was about to crumble. The police discovered his sordid secret, a recovering alcoholic. He drowned his sobriety in vodka, fueling his deranged desires. He'd actually taken his twisted fantasy to the brink, almost following through with the vile plan that he had been brewing for months. The confession that spilled from his lips was chilling. He had been watching me for an agonizingly long time, obsessing over me in the most disturbing way. His sickening shrine of my photos served as a haunting testament to his obsession. Somehow, I escaped that harrowing ordeal, my innocence bruised but not broken. The memory of that day still casts long, dark shadows over my heart, a grim reminder of the fear and terror I'd experienced. But amidst the nightmare, I found strength I never knew I had. That horrific experience taught me the importance of intuition, of trusting my gut when it screams danger.